And speaking of fans, this next one, this is when I'm going to become insufferable is when I talk about this next book.
Welcome to Keep It Fictional, a weekly podcast for book lovers by book lovers. Build your to-be-read list with Sadie, Liz, Virginia, Fiona, and Corrine from the Port Moody Public Library. Warning, this podcast contains strong opinions and may cause an increase in your library holds list.
Welcome back to another episode of Keep It Fictional, a book podcast for book lovers by book lovers from the Port Moody Public Library. My name is Emma. I'll be your host today, and I am only joined by one of my book friends. I just have Sadie with me here today. So you folks probably remember last week you heard from Virginia and Corrine talking about their most anticipated books through the fall, through the end of the year, so from September to December. And this week you will hear from me and Sadie on the books that we are looking forward to. So these are new books that are being published anytime from September 1st to December 31st. Hopefully you could find something to add to your Christmas gift list out of these books that we have for you today, or maybe you got something from Virginia and Corrine's picks last week. But hopefully today you'll hear about some new YA fantasy. Maybe you'll see some badass warrior women make their appearances. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what Sadie has to share today, and I would love to share my books with you folks as well. So I will start with a book that I'm looking forward to that I actually didn't discover until yesterday. I was digging through our library catalog to see what we have on order that's coming out between now and the end of the year, see if there's anything in here that looks interesting to me. And I saw one that was interesting. It kind of brought me back to interests that I had back in high school that I haven't really thought of for a while. So when I was in high school, I took Spanish class, and one of my classes, we watched a film called The Motorcycle Diaries. So this is a film that documents a motorcycle trip that's taken by 23-year-old Ernesto Che Guevara, a military leader that people probably remember from the Cuban Revolution. So he took it when he was 23, and then several years later after this trip, he would become known as a Marxist guerrilla leader and revolutionary leader in communist Cuba. So this story, The Motorcycle Diaries, kind of documents on that trip how Che Guevara was radicalized, how he observes the different lives of impoverished indigenous folks throughout South and Central America, and how that experience kind of politicized and radicalized his beliefs and led him to become the military leader that he was by the time of his death. So I don't remember why in particular, but I was obsessed with learning about Che Guevara after watching this film. I was so fascinated with his story. I was so fascinated with how he went from being just a regular old medical student. I think it was either a middle class or an upper middle class family in Buenos Aires is where he grew up. And so this kind of regular Joe, regular middle class Argentine man ended up becoming one of the most iconic communist military leaders that has ever existed. And The Motorcycle Diaries is the story of how he got there. So after watching this film, I was so fascinated with his story, so fascinated with learning more about his politics. And the film is adapted from a memoir of the same title that Guevara wrote about that trip that he took before his final year of med school. So this new book that's coming out on November 12th is called Latin America Diaries, and it's kind of a follow-up, kind of a sequel to The Motorcycle Diaries. So while that book was more about before his final year of med school, when he was first learning about all the poverty that people were experiencing throughout South America, this book is about another trip that he took the following year after graduating med school. And it's more about how those values that he started developing on his motorcycle trip turned into his politics. It's more details about how he became that military leader that we know him to be. So while Motorcycle Diaries is more about him kind of discovering about himself, this is how, kind of the steps he took to become that militant revolutionary. It documents how he witnessed a political coup in 1954 in Guatemala, which had a profound effect on his political awareness. And then after that, he fled to Mexico, where he then met Fidel Castro. And they began their long political partnership as the two of them went to Cuba together. So for me, as somebody who was really interested in learning about Che Guevara in the past, not only about the part that he played in the revolution in Cuba, but also how he was radicalized, kind of how he got to that point, I'm really interested in reading a more firsthand account of how he became that person that we know him to be. So this book contains a lot of letters, a lot of poetry written by Guevara himself. So you'll see that firsthand account of how he was radicalized throughout his trips across Latin America. So if you're like me, if you're interested in learning more about Che Guevara or interested in learning more about Latin American history or political history, then you could check out Latin America Diaries. And it's already out in Spanish, but the English translation coming out in Canada will be out on November 12th. So that is my first book to share. And Sadie, what do you have to share with us?
Before I go on to my book, when I was studying at SFU, I was in a show called Fenu Lenu, and part of it included kind of ties to Fidel Castro. And so I cannot hear Fidel Castro's name without this very strange song running through my head from the show called Fidel Castro's Beard. And it went, Fidel Castro's beard, beard, Fidel Castro's beard, beard. And that's all I hear. That's all I hear anytime I hear Fidel Castro. So anyways, all right. So for my first book, I am actually going to be talking about one that in past episodes, I know that we have talked about kind of what your fall reading vibe is going to be. My fall reading vibe tends to be the same pretty much every year, where I want something that makes it feel like fall. I want something cozy. I want something where like the leaves are turning in the book and it's kind of rainy and you just makes you feel like you want to cozy up and just like get under a blanket with a cup of tea and just kind of cozy in and read a lovely book. And so this is, I think, my first pick is one that fills all of those kind of boxes. I'm going to read the blurb that Goodreads says, and then I'll kind of give some more information about the book. But it says, a librarian with a knack for solving murders realizes there is something decidedly supernatural afoot in her little town in this cozy fantasy mystery. So I feel like this checks kind of all of those boxes. I always like something that has a little bit of like witchiness or magic in it because of Halloween, and it's just kind of a time of year where that's really good. And then also the mystery aspect, and I hope it's going to be well written and just makes me kind of want to get into the story and curl up. There's a cat on the front of the cover. I mean, you can't really go wrong with a cat on the front of the cover. So this is the Village Library Demon Hunting Society by C.M. Waggoner. And I have not read any of their books before. I have one on my TBR list. It's unfortunately been there for quite a while and I haven't gotten to it. So maybe this is going to be the one that I start with. This one comes out September 24th. And as the little blurb says, it is about a librarian named Sherry Pinkwhistle. And unfortunately, Sherry keeps finding bodies. On the upside, she also keeps solving murders, so that's good. But she's concerned by just how many killers she has had to track down in her quaint, tiny little village. None of the neighbors seem that surprised by all of the murders that are happening, but Sherry is becoming convinced that whatever has been causing these deaths is not entirely natural. And so when someone close to Sherry winds up dead, and then her cat, Lord Thomas Crowell, becomes possessed by what seems to be an ancient demon, Sherry is now fairly certain that these deaths are not being caused by natural means. And she's realizing that she might need to become an exorcist as well as an amateur sleuth. But she's not alone. She gets help from people around the town. There's an assortment of friends who are a demon hunting society in the town that she gets help with, as well as some others who help her solve these murders and get rid of the demon. This book is said to be a mix of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Murder, She Wrote. I think that sounds pretty good. So I'm really excited. I think that, as I said, I'm just hoping, crossing my fingers, that the writing is good because I feel like cozy mysteries and cozy fantasy and cozy romancy kind of stuff, they can be really, really good if the writing is really well done. And then they can also just be really not if the writing is kind of not up to snuff. So I am really hoping that this one is, because it kind of has a lot of the boxes that I'm looking to check for the fall: the cozy, the magic, the murder, the mystery, the demons, why not, and the cats. So I think this is going to be a good one. So this is again out on September 24th, the Village Library Demon Hunting Society. All right, Emma, what is your next pick?
Before I jump into my next one, that sounds super cute. I'm not usually like a cozy mystery reader, and I have the same thing that you brought up about the writing style is like I've tried so many romances that I just have to put down because the writing is not good. So I can be quite picky about that kind of stuff. But as you were talking about this book, I was like a little bit of practical magic meets a little bit of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and then you said Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So I might actually read this one because as a well-known cat lover, that sounds like it'll be a good time. I originally had an order I was going to do these books in, but one of mine is cat related. So I'm going to talk about that one now instead, just to keep with the theme. Sadie and I are both cat parents. Not everyone in the library agrees with us with the whole cat dog conversation, but it's good to know that I'm with some fellow cat lovers in the room today. So of all my books today, this one has by far the most wacky title. So I'll just have to read it like word by word before I jump into the description. But this next book I have that I'm looking forward to is called Invisible Kitties, A Feline Study of Fluid Mechanics or the Spurious Incidents of the Cats in the Nighttime by author Yu Yoyo. So it's one that like I will never remember the title. I'll have to read it every single time I try to tell somebody that they should check this book out. But it sounds super wacky. It sounds a little bit surreal, a little bit absurd, but also has that kind of cozy cat element to it. It seems like one of those books where like not a whole lot of plot happens, but it's more about this couple and their relationship with their cats throughout the book. So it's described as whimsical, as an inventive debut. It's a debut novel. And the premise is a young couple's daily life is disrupted by their newly adopted cat. This cat is kind of feral, kind of a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed little kitten, aptly named Cat, just named Cat. And their new kitten upturns the routine of the narrator and her husband in their cramped apartment. Their lives are forever altered as they gradually gain insight into what they describe as the fantastical world of cats. And I can see Kareed rolling her eyes at me right now. But you've got me at fantastical world of cats. So the book charts the couple's ever-evolving relationship with cats, both with the cats that they live with, but also with the cats that solely exist within their imagination. And like I said at the very beginning, this book really embraces the surrealism of it all, the absurd. Cats are dropping out of the sky. Cats are growing from soil, from the earth, and they're transmuting. The cats fly, they flow, they evaporate. And the young couple's everyday life offers glimpses into how joy can kind of suddenly sneak into their lives, either through these cats or through other things that are going on, but often in the form of cats, whether they're real or imaginary. So as a reader who really loves books that play with the boundaries of reality and imagination, and also as a proud cat mom of two feral little beasts, I was just telling Sadie before we recorded that my little kitten has been escaping out of my apartment every day and it's driving me crazy, but she's just like so excited to go everywhere but at home. But as a proud cat mom, as someone who loves kind of crazy, ridiculous cats, but also who sees the joy that these like tiny little monsters bring into my life, I'm really excited to check this book out. Also, the title is Wicked, so that in and of itself kind of sold the book to me. So if you're also a cat lover, if you also like things that are a little bit weird, a little bit absurd, maybe a little bit banana pants, who knows, then you could also look forward to, and I will do the whole thing again, Invisible Kitties, A Feline Study of Fluid Mechanics or the Spurious Incidents of the Cats in the Nighttime, which is coming out in Canada on October 1st. It was originally written in Chinese, but it was translated by Jeremy Tiang. So that's another one I'm looking forward to. Love a good cat book, love a good cozy vibe for the fall. And I like things that are just like silly and uplifting, but also have that magical realism element. So hopefully that one will be really fun. So what is your next book, Sadie, that you have for us today?
All right. I'm going to go back to my tried and true YA, young adult, romance, fantasy. This one is coming out in September 3rd. So don't have too long to wait for it. And it is kind of a new romantasy of the year. And it says it is perfect for fans of Sarah J. Maas and Leigh Bardugo, which are two of my favorite YA fantasy writers. So I think that this one is going to be right up my alley. And it has to do with assassins, which is one of my, as we've learned on this show, it's one of my favorite random subgenres of fantasy fiction is assassins. So this tells the story of two rival assassins who have been pitted against each other in a deadly game of revenge, where the most dangerous mistake of all, is falling in love. Yeah. So this is called The Dagger and the Flame. It is by Catherine Doyle, and it takes place in the city of Phantom. It's a kingdom of cobbled streets, flickering lamplight, beautiful buildings, and secret catacombs. It kind of sounds a little bit like Edinburgh, to be honest with you. Just kind of the catacombs and the lamplight and the cobbled streets and things. But I'm sure there's any number of cities that can probably fall under that description as well. And in Phantom, shade magic is scarce and deadly, and it's controlled by two enemy groups, the Cloaks and the Daggers. They are thieves and assassins. Now, on the night of her mother's murder, 17-year-old Seraphine runs for her life. She goes to the Cloaks and she seeks sanctuary with the Cloaks, and she is set on revenge. But she has secret abilities that nobody knows about. And her secret abilities are a match for the dark-haired boy whose quicksilver eyes follow her around the city. Oh my gosh, it sounds so dramatic, but I feel like they have to make them very, very dramatic. But nothing can prepare Sarah for the moment she finally comes face to face with Ransom, who is heir to the Order of the Daggers. And Ransom is shocked to discover that this unassuming farm girl wields a strange and blazing magic that he has never seen before. Now, among rumors of monsters stalking the streets and rival guilds grappling for control, Sarah and Ransom are drawn together by something more than just magic. I will give you $5 to anyone who can guess what it is. I don't think you're going to have a hard time. So anyways, this is an enemies to lovers kind of romance. I feel like it has a little bit of a star-crossed lovers romance as well. It kind of has those like two rival sides, warring, not necessarily families, but warring groups, which if you listen to our romance episode, I'm not always a huge fan of kind of the star-crossed lovers tropes, but if you throw in a little bit of magic and if you throw in a little bit of assassins, and I feel like it's probably not going to end in quite as much dramatic tragedy as Romeo and Juliet does. So I feel like there's a bit more that's going to be going on with it. And yeah, I think that this one is just kind of set to be exactly what it advertises, and that's what you go to it for. That's why you read it, is because it's going to be exactly what you want. It's going to be that kind of slow burn enemies to lovers with some magic. And I think that is kind of, again, it's sort of exactly what I go to when I'm in a bit of a reading slump. I think we talked about that at one point, and I tend to go back to the familiar. I tend to go back to either authors that I know and love or genres and kind of tropes that I know and love to kind of get me back into things. I'm not necessarily in a slump right now, but I think that, again, just wanting that kind of cozy and familiar vibe for the fall. This one is going to be, I think one that kind of checks that off. And I mean, it has assassins. In my mind, you can't go wrong with a book about assassins. I don't know where this weird obsession of mine comes from. No idea. Don't know. So this is also the first book of a series, which I'm a huge series fan. It doesn't look like any of the other series has been added yet to Goodreads, so I don't know kind of how many the author's planning or kind of what's going to be going on with that. But I'm excited to have kind of a new series to get into, even if I have to wait a little bit for the rest of it. But I think this will be a good place to start and get into kind of that romantasy, murdery vibe. So that is The Dagger and the Flame by Catherine Doyle.
I don't want you to think it's weird. I also really enjoy assassins. I feel like I haven't read enough in like YA books, and I forget exactly if like the characters in This Is How You Lose the Time were assassins or if they were spies or exactly what their roles were. But like in television shows and in like anime and manga, I typically love an assassin character or kind of like an anti-hero character. So you're not alone, Sadie. It is not a weird obsession. It is a fully valid obsession with murder.
Well, and I feel like, I mean, there's a lot of books out there, so I have to believe that other people also enjoy this subgenre of things, because I keep finding my way to assassin books. So they are being written and other people must be reading them as well.
Exactly. So it's funny that you said that your book is kind of in like a fantasy world that looks a little similar to Edinburgh, because my next book happens to take place in Scotland. So we're doing a great job with these transitions today. We fully planned this. I hope our listeners know we fully planned this. So my book is a realistic fiction, and it's actually kind of semi-autobiographical. It's the author's debut, so we don't have any of his other writings to go off of for it. But it seems like this was kind of taken from his own experience growing up in kind of poorer working class Scotland and outside of Edinburgh. This book takes place in Fife, outside of Edinburgh in Scotland, or in Glasgow, I mean. So more like smaller town, poorer working class Scotland, and specifically growing up with undiagnosed ADHD. So the next book I have is called Only Here, Only Now, and it's written by Tom Newlands, and this is his debut novel. So I look forward to kind of checking out his writing style for the first time. So like I said before, it takes place in working class Scotland. This book is in Fife, which is just a little bit north of Edinburgh, and it's the summer of 1994, and our main character, Cora Mowat. I don't know how you do it in a Scottish accent, but Cora Mowat is tired of her boredom. She's tired of living in a small town. She's tired of having this restless mind that she feels like she has no peace from. And the author states that she has undiagnosed ADHD. So she's kind of battling with this neurodiversity that she doesn't have treatment for, that she doesn't really have support for, and trying to kind of break free from, not really break free from it, but like find ways that she can better deal with it. What she is desperate to break free from is the limits of being in Fife, the limits of being kind of suffocated by this small town she lives in. And she's unsure of what the future holds for her. And Cora is a teenager. Her specific age wasn't listed, but she's a teenager living at home with her mom. Tensions rise in her house pretty quickly when her mother invites a new man to live with them, a kind but strange, one-eyed shoplifter named Gunner. And then a tragedy strikes. Goodreads was not specific about what this tragedy is, but a tragedy strikes, and Cora rebels against her small-town existence in search of something more for her. She wants to live, she wants to be accepted, she wants to find a path to something good, kind of find a purpose for herself. So she must learn to navigate both her grief and also kind of navigating everything that she thinks she knows about herself to find a way forward from this kind of small town existence that she feels is suffocating her. So I typically enjoy coming of age novels, especially with strong female protagonists. I'm excited about the neurodiversity representation in this one. And I studied abroad in Scotland briefly in university, just for like 6 months. And I was in Glasgow. But I'm excited for a kind of a new perspective, a new author's perspective into working class Scottish life. Because Scotland isn't a particularly wealthy country. There is kind of a lot of working class culture in Glasgow and in Edinburgh already. But I don't know a lot about what it's like outside of those two main cities. So it'll be cool to kind of see what it's like in a small town. And especially since so much Scottish fiction is so centered in Glasgow and Edinburgh, I'm excited to kind of get a different perspective from that. This book is described as vibrant, lyrical, and fiercely funny. It's a story about identity and family, two themes that are kind of appear often in my reading tastes, and also about hope and resilience. I especially enjoy kind of complicated family stories. One of my favorite books I read this year was Pachinko, which is kind of the like staple complicated family book. So I'm really looking forward to checking this one out, especially one with a bit of a Scottish twist to it. Like I said before, it's a debut, so I don't really know what to expect from the author yet from his writing style, but it has really good reviews. People seem to praise his work that he's done so far. So I hope that I agree with those, but nonetheless, I think it'll be fun to try something different. And like I said before, it's described as semi-autobiographical. And I always love like an own voices story where people kind of don't necessarily like write a memoir exactly about their own experience, but use their own lived experience to portray the struggles that they've dealt with through their characters. So I'm hoping that this will be really fun and kind of a new insight into an ADHD narrative and like a working class narrative. The author was described as a brilliant new talent from of writing from lived experience. So it seems like he'll be pretty good at that. So yeah, I'm excited for this new coming of age novel about a neurodiverse teenage girl in a small working class town in Scotland. So this is called Only Here, Only Now. And it's out in Canada on November 12th. All right, Sadie, is it more YA or do you have something different for us this time?
It is not more YA. So I have 2 sequels in my most anticipated. I try not to do too many sequels just because it's kind of more of a commitment to to know that you have to read the first one before you can get to this one. But this one was kind of a no-brainer. Virginia graciously allowed me to talk about this one and did not talk about it herself, even though the first book I think was one of her favorite books. And I don't want to say ever because I don't want to put that on, but I know that she absolutely loved the first one, and so did I, and so did a lot of our book friends. Many of us gave the first one 5 stars. I have passed the first book along to my husband, to my mother-in-law, and they both absolutely love it and love the writer. So this one is the long-anticipated sequel to TJ Klune's The House in the Cerulean Sea. And this is Somewhere Beyond the Sea. It's coming out September 10th. I can't look at this title without starting to sing the song Somewhere Beyond the Sea. And I've actually, in full disclosure, I've started this book already. I did get an arc of this one, so I'm not super far into it, but already in like the first 3 chapters, I have laughed out loud multiple times and gotten a little bit teary-eyed because of just how like wholesome and lovely and wonderful this story is. So if you have read House in the Cerulean Sea, then you kind of are familiar with the backstory. If you have not read House in the Cerulean Sea, it follows Linus Baker, and he is in the first book as a caseworker in the department in charge of magical youth. So his job is to kind of go and check out different centers and different magical youth and make sure that everything is kind of being done appropriately. And for Linus, he makes sure that all of the rules are being followed to a T. Everything has to be done exactly according to how the rules dictate. Until he winds up on Marcius Island and he meets a house full of magical youth. And this includes one youth named Lucy, which is short for Lucifer, who is constantly having to be told that no, it is not appropriate to kill people. No, you can't chop people's heads off. Those inner feelings of yours are not the right thing to do. Apart from Lucy, there is, I think, an amorphous blob who really, really just wants to be like a bellhop in a hotel. That is his only dream. There's a shapeshifter who turns into a very small, I think it's a Pomeranian, but it might be a different kind of dog, shapeshifts into that. There's a garden gnome, and I think there's a sprite as well. And so this is kind of the house that Linus ends up in, and they are all cared for by Arthur Parnassus, and he is taken charge of these kids. He's created this kind of foster home for them, and he is fiercely, fiercely protective of these children. And so when Linus kind of enters their life and only follows the rules, wants to make sure that everything is right, there's a lot of clashing that goes on. But it ends in a very happy way, as most of TJ Klune's books do. And now we are back with Somewhere Beyond the Sea. And so we're back on the island with Arthur, and Linus is now no longer a caseworker, but he is living with the family. He and Arthur are together, and they are living in this house together. And they have a family, and Arthur is currently working on becoming the adoptive father to all 6 children who live in this household. But Arthur has secrets. One very big one that we learn in the first book that I won't say. And these secrets are going to come back to him. And it's going to maybe stand in the way of him being able to adopt these children. And so we kind of start the story shortly after the last one ended. And Arthur has just received a summons to come and talk about kind of what happened to him when he was a child and lived in the same house on the same island. And the hope is that by Arthur telling his story, which is quite tragic and quite difficult, that maybe this will never happen to any other children. That is the hope. But when he arrives, he finds himself in a place where he didn't expect to be. He's needing to make this public statement, but now he's also fighting for the future of his family and of all magic people. And then at the same time, a new child is going to be coming into the home and joining them. One who finds power in calling himself a monster, a name that Arthur has worked very, very hard to protect his own children from. And Arthur doesn't know if his family is able to withstand this new person. And so it kind of puts Arthur and Linus and the family. There's Zoe Chapelwhite, who is the island sprite, and her girlfriend, Mayor Helen Webb. They're kind of there to support Linus and Arthur and the children. And they kind of just trying to figure out how they can be a family and how they can protect themselves and all magical children. So again, this book is kind of primed to be just a really lovely feel-good story with some tension, I think, before you get to that lovely ending. I have no doubt that it's going to be a lovely ending. I haven't finished it, so I don't know for sure. But TJ Klune is very good at kind of creating those just like warm, happy feelings at the end of his story. So I think that this one is going to follow that same trend. You get things from Arthur's perspective, which we did not get in the last book. The first one was from Linus's perspective. And so it'll be interesting to kind of hear from Arthur's side of things and kind of see the way that he looks at the world and see the way that he looks at his family. As I said, 3 chapters in and I've already laughed and cried. So I feel like this one is going to be a good one. So if you are a fan of TJ Klune, if you really liked House in the Cerulean Sea, I think that this one is not going to disappoint. If you are kind of like, I don't know if I would call it a cozy fantasy, but maybe that if you like a queer story, if you like a queer romance, if you like kind of that taste of magic, but also kind of the humor added into it as well, then this one is it's a win. I'm going to say it's a win even before I've read it. I will let you know at the end of the fall if it makes it onto my top 5. But this is Somewhere Beyond the Sea by TJ Klune. All right, we have 2 left. What's your penultimate book, Emma?
So I haven't read House of the Cerulean Sea, but after hearing you talk about it, I'm like, I have to read this book. It sounds so good. Yeah, and I because I haven't read the first, I obviously have to read it before jumping into the sequel, but now I have the motivation to do it.
I feel like it's one of the ones where Virginia's and like all of our tastes have like converged in kind of this weird way. Like me and Virginia, we have elements that we both enjoy in books, but we don't often kind of come together in one. And this one, I think, just checks off something for both of us in a way.
Like, I like magic, but maybe not quite to the extent that you do. Like, I don't love a like full blown fantasy book. I like magical realism. I like a little bit of magic kind of sprinkled in. But this one just sounds so wholesome. Like wholesome, but with a little bit of darkness, with a little bit of tension kind of peppered in. And obviously you don't have to sell me on reading a queer narrative. So that, like, I'm adding that one to my list for the year. You've got one fan already. And speaking of fans, this next one, like, this is when I'm going to become insufferable is when I talk about this next book. So this is another one that I didn't actually realize was coming out till I was sifting through Bibliocommons yesterday, trying to find books that I could talk about today. And once I saw this one, I was like, well, that has to go on the list. There's no way I can't mention that this is coming out. So in this current day and age, in this age of the Eras Tour, the age of one particular pop star, I told you I'm going to be insufferable, one particular pop star embodying the pop culture zeitgeist, here we are with a new book coming out November 12th that's diving into the life and the music and the phenomenon that is Miss Taylor Swift. So all of my book friends know I'm a Swiftie. It's no secret. I do not try to keep it to myself. I run a slew of Taylor Swift themed programs here at the library. I make the little bracelets with the kids. I was lucky enough to snatch Eras Tour tickets for when she comes to Vancouver in December. So it should be no surprise to anybody that I am hyped for this new piece of Taylor lore. And it's actually written by one of the leading music journalists, I think, of this time, I would say. His name is Rob Sheffield. So Rob Sheffield writes for Rolling Stone. He writes, obviously, on a bunch of different musicians. But there's one article of his about Taylor Swift that I frequent. I love a ranking. I love a list ranking things. Maybe it's like the information professional aspect of my personality. But he has an article that is a definitive ranking of all of Taylor's songs that she has ever released. And I think it currently, and he adds to it as she releases new music. And I think it currently caps at 274 songs. So it is a beast of an article, but boy, is it fun to read. And I mostly agree with his opinions. He says All Too Well is the #1 song, which I think everybody can objectively agree is true. Most of his opinions he has for like the top 10. I share with my own opinions. The song he thinks is her absolute worst is also one of my least favorite songs. So I really trust his writing and the way that he kind of takes Taylor's music, takes like parts of her life and makes it into really fascinating journalism. He's kind of the leading, I say Swiftian, he's kind of the leading Swiftian journalist right now. He's also a dedicated Swiftie, but he has this good balance of really praising her work, but also remaining very critical of it. Like if she writes a bad song, he will make sure she knows that. And as any good journalist should, he kind of stays critical of the people that he really cares about. He's also been allowed closer access to her than any other music journalist working today. I think he's her most trusted journalist. So only he could have written this book. So I realized I did not even mention the title. The book is called Heartbreak is the National Anthem, which dedicated Swifties will know is a lyric from the song New Romantics, one of my favorite songs. And it's supposed to be kind of an intimate look into the life and the music of modern pop's most legendary figure. Taylor, kind of as a person, is both approachable and enigmatic. She's treated as America's sweetheart, yet we can't help but wonder how much we truly know and understand about her, how much of that personality is a facade or is fabricated for the spotlight. She's famous for keeping herself out of politics, kind of out of fear of being ostracized, like other female pop and country contemporaries have been. I don't know if you've seen it, Sadie, but she has a documentary on Netflix called Miss Americana. And there's this whole bit in it where she talks about how she's always wanted to be out about her politics. She's always wanted to be outspoken and to use her platform for that. But after what happened to the Dixie Chicks, when they kind of publicly spoke out against George Bush, she was terrified of being ostracized for it and kind of alienating half of her fan base for being open about her political opinions. And that's something that she's received a lot of criticism for not saying enough, but also saying too much. So I'm really interested to see kind of more detail on how those decisions that she's made throughout her life, whether it's being outward about her opinions or not, how much of that was her own choice, how much of that was kind of controlled by her management. So I'm really fascinated to get that like deeper journalistic dive into Taylor's life and into like the proper opinions that she has. She's been a victim of misogyny and sexism, especially in the music industry, yet she's also a major contributor to climate change. So she's kind of this interesting figure where like there's things that I love about her and that I really like idolize about her, but she can be problematic in ways like any sort of celebrity can. Taylor Swift is synonymous with American music, with pop culture today. So I think this book will be a big hit. I think a lot of people will be really interested in learning more about her life. And as a huge fan and also a critic of her, I really look forward to seeing what Rob Sheffield has to say, especially because I've already really enjoyed his journalism before. So I know he's an excellent journalistic writer, and especially a journalistic writer when it comes to the topic of Taylor Swift. So I'm hyped about this book. I don't know if it's going to read like kind of a nonfiction prose or whether it's going to be more of like a coffee table book with a lot of images in it. But I'll probably share more about it once it comes out, once I get the chance to read it. So if you're like me, if you're a Swiftie, if you just want to learn more about Taylor Swift and kind of see her from an insider's perspective, so a journalist who's allowed kind of more access to her and to her own personal life than most other people have, then you should check out Heartbreak is the National Anthem, which is coming out on November 12th. So yeah, that is my penultimate book. I appreciate you, Sadie, for bearing with me through all of that. What do you have next to share with us?
I was actually going to save this one till the end, but I think I'm going to talk about it now because it is a bit of my fangirling. And Emma, you actually brought this one to my attention, that it was coming out this fall. So everybody on this podcast probably knows that I don't read a lot of nonfiction. I don't tend to do memoirs. I don't tend to read a ton of other nonfiction. And there is kind of 1/2 exceptions to that. Jeopardy is one. So anything that has to do with Jeopardy, I will read. It is just, we watch Jeopardy all the time. We record them if we can't watch them every night. We just finished the Jeopardy Masters tournament. It was only a few months late. We watch it all. It's kind of our one go-to show that we always watch. So anything to do with Jeopardy, I will read. I've read the Alex Trebek memoir. I've talked about the Amy Schneider one on the podcast before. I've read stuff by Ken Jennings. Like I love Jeopardy, and I will read anything from that, even though I don't read nonfiction. Now, the other exception to this, and I don't know if I've talked about it too much, but I've probably mentioned it, is Gilmore Girls. And I am a huge Gilmore Girls fan. It is my 100% comfort show. If I'm having trouble sleeping, I will just put an episode of Gilmore Girls on and just listen to it, and it will help me fall asleep. I've watched the show like beginning to end multiple times. I convinced my husband to watch the show and he really enjoyed it as well. That was quite a big win for me. And so I absolutely love Gilmore Girls. And so when Emma told me that one of the people from Gilmore Girls was putting out a memoir this fall, I knew that it was going to be on my list because I have read the Lauren Graham memoir. I've read her YA book, which was okay. It wasn't terrible. I have not read anything. I don't know if Alexis Bledel has put anything out. I'm not a huge Alexis Bledel fan, so I don't know if I would read that. But this person I love, and I've watched her in other Amy Sherman Palladino shows as well. She was in, I think it was called Bunheads, which was a show featuring Sutton Foster about Broadway performer and dancer who kind of moves to a small town. And she was in that show as well. And she has had quite a varied career. She's been on Broadway. She's been on TV. She's done a ton of stuff. And so this is Kelly Bishop, Emily Gilmore, and this is her memoir, The Third Gilmore Girl. So yeah, it just kind of goes through her career. It goes through her life. It says it's going to be a candid and captivating memoir spanning 6 decades in show business, which is quite a career in show business, from Broadway to Hollywood, Chorus Line, Dirty Dancing, Gilmore Girls, and much, much more. And so it kind of goes through her career, which has been defined by landmark achievements. She's won a Tony Award for her being in the original Broadway cast of A Chorus Line. She played Jennifer Grey's mother in Dirty Dancing, which I don't think I realized when I first watched Dirty Dancing. I don't think I knew who she was, so I might have to watch it again, knowing that character. And then also her iconic role as Emily Gilmore in Gilmore Girls. And then this memoir, she kind of reflects on the life that she's had and looks towards the future, kind of what she still is working on, what she's still wanting to kind of achieve. She shares some of her greatest stories, the life lessons she's learned. She transitioned. She was a dancer originally, and so that's kind of how she got started. And she kind of talks about how she transitioned from dance to theater and to acting. And then also about her personal life. So kind of talking about her marriage, which I didn't know she was married to a compulsive gambler. And so she kind of talks about that experience and the losses that she experienced. And then, yeah, kind of losing, again, I didn't know much about her personal life, but losing her second husband to cancer. And it kind of just goes as a memoir does. It's going to go over her life. It's going to go over her career. It says it's full of witty insights featuring a special collection of personal and professional photographs kind of from her life and from her career. So I think this one is going to be an interesting one to read. I might see if I can listen to this one. I'm hoping that she narrates the audiobook. I always love when a memoir is narrated by the person who has written it. I think that it's just has that personal touch. And I think that it's when they're actors, why not? Why not do it yourself? And so, so I'm really excited to kind of get into the mind of Emily Gilmore a little bit more. She is one of the characters that you love to hate or you hate to love, whichever way she's leaning in an episode. But I think that she has quite a following, I think, of fans. And I have, as I've gotten older, I have understood her character a lot more in Gilmore Girls. So if you are a fan of Gilmore Girls, if you are a fan of celebrity memoirs or memoirs in general, or just interested in kind of a showbiz career or learning about Broadway and Hollywood and all of that kind of stuff, then I think that this would probably be a good one. And I am very excited to read The Third Gilmore Girl by Kelly Bishop. All right, Emma, last pick. What did you have for your last pick?
Last book. So I agree that having the author of a memoir, and especially if that author is an actor, reading the memoir is the ideal way to consume it. I remember listening to Jeanette McCurdy, who I'm younger than you, Sadie, so she was on iCarly. I don't know if you watched iCarly on Nickelodeon. Jeanette McCurdy narrates her own memoir, and she's just so funny. Like hearing the actor kind of tell their own story is just such a different experience. I also have to give credit because I don't remember if it was my friend Jillian or my partner Kate who pointed out the Emily Gilmore memoir to me, but whichever one of you, they both listened to the podcast. So whichever one of you it was, thank you for steering us towards that, because I think both Sadie and I are excited for that one. And Kate's a giant Gilmore Girls fan, so we can all book club it together. And that would be fun. Awesome. So my last book that I'm looking forward to, I have to give a bit of a shout out to Virginia for this one, because this is the second book from an author where Virginia and I both just like absolutely, absolutely loved the first book by this author. I unfortunately can never talk about it on the podcast because Virginia already has. It made her best books of 2022 list at the end of the year. That book was called Our Wives Under the Sea. And it's kind of a like surreal and like speculative. I don't even know how to describe it. It's about these two women who are married, and one of them is a marine biologist who gets stranded on a submarine. Her dive was supposed to last like 2 or 3 weeks, and she ends up being stranded for 6 months. And while she's down there on the sub, obviously she and the two other people that she's on the sub with are kind of slowly losing their minds as they are stuck in this claustrophobic space for so long, not knowing why they're stuck down there, not knowing where they are and when they can ever get back up. But there's also some kind of like, we don't know what's lurking in the darkness beyond the sub. We don't know what's actually out there in the deep sea. So there's a little bit of kind of like absurd, surreal, magical realism happening. So that's kind of the general plot of the book. But at the core, it's mostly about the relationship between these two wives, these two women, and especially as the one wife returns to land, returns to her wife, kind of how their relationship changes after she was stranded. So this book was like, I would describe it as like it was meditative, it was atmospheric, it was just so, so, so beautiful. And one of the most like accurate depictions of queer relationships I've ever read. These people were just so real and so authentic and genuine. But also they were dealing with things that were like weird and absurd and banana pants. It was a very, very good book. I really loved it. And the author, Julia Armfield, is coming out with a new book called Private Rites. So it was actually released she's British, so it was released in Britain back in June, but it's coming out in North America, in Canada, and the US on December 3rd. And this book is described as a speculative queer reimagining of King Lear, which is my favorite Shakespeare. I love the tragedies, but King Lear is like by far my favorite one. I saw a stage production of it in Minneapolis once that was just like absolutely phenomenal. I can still remember the visual of like, I think it's which one? It's Regan stabbing out Gloucester's eyeball. Oh, it's so good. But I love King Lear. I will read any King Lear adaptation. And the fact that Julia Armfield is writing like a queer sapphic King Lear adaptation, it feels like this book was made for me. And Virginia was kind enough to allow me to speak about this one on the podcast today because she knows how hyped I am about it. So we've got this King Lear adaptation. So obviously we have three sisters. We have Isla, Irene, and Agnes. And they have not spoken in some time. And by the time their father dies, they're kind of finally brought back together after not being in touch with each other. So obviously very similar to Goneril, Regan, and Cordelia, the original sisters of the play. Their father was an architect, and he's described as being as cruel as he was revered. So my assumption would be really, really good at his job, maybe not so good at the parenting part of the life that he lived. So his death offers an opportunity for the sisters to come back together in a whole new way. They return to the glass house that they grew up in, which is his most famous creation, to sort out the secrets and the memories that he left behind until their fragile bond that they have is shattered by a revelation in his will. And obviously Goodreads was not clear about what this revelation was. But after kind of discovering what's in his will, the sisters become more estranged than they've ever been before, and their lives start spinning out of control. So much like Our Wives Under the Sea, I think a lot of this book is going to be focused on the relationships between the sisters, but also their romantic relationships that they have with their partners. It seems like each of them like has a different relationship that in its own way is falling apart. Their mother had disappeared long ago, and that disappearance leads to something more sinister that's kind of lurking in the shadows as they're going through these discoveries. There's a lot of queer bonds that are discussed, and there's strange or complicated sister relationships. I have a complicated sister relationship, so I'm looking forward to reading about that. And like I said before, Armfield's first book was very meditative and atmospheric. There wasn't a whole lot of plot, but it was much more character driven. It was like the little character details that really drew me into her writing. So I'm looking forward to getting more of that. Like it doesn't seem like there's going to be a lot of plot points that hit, but it's more about the death is kind of the beginning incident. And then it's the relationships that start to fall apart from that. So very similar to what King Lear is actually about. It's more about the complex relationships between these sisters that's going to tell this story. And I love complex queer relationships. I know at least one of the sisters is queer, but multiple of them have either marriages or romantic relationships that are falling apart. So I'm interested to see how that plays out. The book's described as weird, surreal, and speculative, which are three words that I would put on if I had to write down my reading taste, those three words would appear on it. So I'm really, really looking forward to Private Rites by Julia Armfield. So this one's out in Canada on December 3rd. I have to wait quite a while for it. But I think this is the book that I am most, as much as I'm hyped about the Taylor Swift book, this is the one that I am the most hyped about, just given that it's like a queer sapphic retelling of King Lear that's going to be like creepy and spooky. Oh, I can't wait. So that is my last book. What do you have for us to close us out, Sadie?
All right. So I'm going to talk about my second sequel. So I try not to have more than one sequel, but there were two really good ones that were coming out this fall. So one of my favorite books, I don't know when I read it, to be honest with you. I think I maybe read it this year, but it was published last year. So it didn't go on my list for last year, and it's unfortunately not going to get on my list for this year because I read it in the wrong year. But one of my favorite books was Thieves' Gambit by Kayvion Lewis. And this was a YA kind of heist story about a young teenage thief who is a part of a very well-known, widespread thieving family. And her name is Ross Quest, and she has been taught her entire life that a quest can only trust another quest. This is the lesson that she has kind of been ingrained in her since she was a toddler. And honestly, it's really only just her mother and her aunt who she has been taught she can trust, because those are the only two members of her family that are kind of in her life. But when her mother is kidnapped on a job gone bad, which is partially due to Ross's own plans to escape her family, she feels so much guilt that she needs to figure out a way that she can rescue her mom. And the only way that she can do that is to join an international thieving competition called the Thieves' Gambit, where young thieves from around the world are given a series of thieving challenges. And the last one standing is granted one wish from a group called the Organization who is running this challenge. And it can be any wish at all. And Ross plans to use it to get her mother back. But things do not go according to plan. In the end, Ross realizes that one of the only people that she ever trusted outside of her family is actually betraying her and has been working against her the whole time. And at the end of the first book, Ross's family has been sent to death, including her. But with a last-minute twist, Ross is somehow still alive and working now for the Organization with her rival. And they are being tasked with challenges that they are going to be doing together. But as Ross learned in the last book, a quest can only trust another quest. And more so, what she learned is that she can only trust herself. Her family cannot even be called upon to tell her the truth. And so Ross is very much alone. Ross is now working for this organization and being put into more and more dangerous situations. And she's now finding herself at the center of a power struggle within the organization. But because of this, she sees her chance to change her fortunes. And as a new deadly gambit develops for control of the criminal underworld, Ross strikes a risky deal to guarantee protection for herself and her family. So in the final clash, Ross will square off against a ruthless opponent who will stop at nothing to seize power. And in their corner will not only be her rival with his mother, who wants to destroy the quests at any cost. So this new gambit takes Ross and her crew into the intoxicating casinos of Monte Carlo, across treacherous snow-covered slopes in Antarctica, as Ross competes against her rival in a fight for her life. Loyalties will be tested, backs will be stabbed, hearts will be broken. May the best thief win. The description of this is action-packed, and honestly, I think that matches the vibe of these books really well. The first one was pretty much go, 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 go from the second you opened it. So if you really like kind of a really, really action-packed story, if you like a good heist, who doesn't love a good heist? That's one of my other favorite subgenres is heist fiction. I know me and Virginia have talked about that. We actually did a heist episode once a while back, but yeah, if you like a good heist, if you like a kind of a high stakes action packed story, lots of adventure, lots of betrayal, a little bit of romance or not, then I think that this series is a really good one. And again, so this is the sequel to Thieves Gambit, and this one is called Heist Royale by Kayvion Lewis. And I'm very, very excited. It doesn't come out until November, so I have to wait until November 12th for this one. But I'm pretty sure I already have it on my holds list. So very, very excited about this one. And that is my final pick for the fall. Oh, it's a lot.
If anyone's wondering what to get me and Sadie for Christmas, you've got a list now. I think both of us have a couple honorable mentions that we were kind of including in our, this is the book that I could talk about. This is the book that sounds really good, but didn't quite fully make the cut. So I'll just mention mine quick. One of them is by a tried and true author that it's pretty much guaranteed that I'll enjoy something that I read by her, but some of her books can be a bit more disturbing than others. But this is Louise Erdrich is coming out with a new book this fall called The Mighty Red. I don't have the exact release date pulled up, but it will be sometime from September to December. And this one takes place kind of on a farm in like vaguely rural Midwest, I would assume either Minnesota or North Dakota, knowing Louise Erdrich, and about kind of the really complicated family and interpersonal relationships amongst the people up in this farming community. So if you enjoy kind of Midwest fiction, if you enjoy kind of complex literary fiction, complex family relationships, maybe a little bit of darkness in there, because that usually seeps through a lot of Louise Erdrich's books, then you should check out The Mighty Red. Another one is by an author that Virginia and I have both definitely spoken about before. He's one of our Bungo Stray Dogs authors, one of our kind of classic Japanese authors, and a lot of his books are being published even like decades and decades after his death because a lot of his writings are still being discovered. So this is a new book by Osamu Dazai coming out this fall called The Beggar Student. And it sounds like the main character is a fictional character named Osamu Dazai, because this man is great at fiction. And it seems like a lot of the scenes that you'll see in this book as the fictional Dazai is kind of going through his life, meeting different people throughout Tokyo, I would assume. It seems like a lot of these scenes are actually scenes that they then use in Bungo Stray Dogs episodes. So if you are a fan of Bungo, this is one that you could check out. And Dazai's books tend to be quite short. So a quick little novella that'll be a nice, I wouldn't say fun, I wouldn't say enjoyable, but if you already like Dazai's work and you're familiar and comfortable with his writing style, which can be quite depressing, then this is it can be depressing, but also like deeply, deeply funny. So this is another one that you could check out called The Beggar Student. And then my last honorable mention is my sequel. I chose not to include this one because I've actually read the first book of this series, but not like, I think it's 3 or 4 that come before this next one that's coming out. But I thoroughly enjoyed Before the Coffee Gets Cold. And I really like cozy Japanese fiction. I really like magical realism and time travel fiction. So I think it's the 5th installment of the Before the Coffee Gets Cold universe is coming out this fall. And it's called Before We Forget Kindness by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. So if you enjoy that cozy Japanese magical realism, if you enjoy those books that take place in like magical coffee shops or bookstores or laundromats or places like that, then this is one you could look forward to. But yeah, so that is my sequel in a series that I have to share. Those are my honorable mentions. Do you have any honorable mentions you want to mention, Sadie, before we go today?
I just have 2 today. One is kind of advertised as Knives Out meets the Inheritance Games with magic in a supernatural thriller. It is called The Lies We Conjure by Sarah Henning. It's about 2 sisters who are kind of brought into this old woman's house to pretend to be her long absent grandchildren. But when they arrive, they realize that more is going on than they initially thought. They are actually trapped in a house with a bunch of witches, and then people start dying. So it's a locked room murder mystery with some magic into it. So I think it's kind of set to be, again, kind of just what it promises, a good kind of a supernatural mystery YA. And then the other one is actually, so this is one that I The style of book is not usually one that I would read. And I think it's similar to Before the Coffee Gets Cold. It's similar to the cat one that you talked about. And this one, it is, I believe the translated version is coming out this fall, but the original version came out in March of 2023, I believe. And this one is called Will Prescribe You a Cat by Seo Ishida, and it's being translated by E. Madison Shimoda. And it kind of takes the idea of a cat cafe to the next level, where it is a cat clinic. And people who are struggling can find, tucked away in an old building at the end of a narrow alley in Kyoto, there's the Kokora Clinic, which prescribes people cats for all of their issues. Patients are often puzzled by this, but when they take their cat for the recommended duration, they witness profound transformations in their lives, guided by the playful, empathetic, occasionally challenging, yet endearing cats that they come up against. So I say that this isn't usually the kind of story that I read because it doesn't sound like a ton is going to happen, which I usually like kind of a more plot-driven story that kind of moves along a little bit more. But I love a good cat. I love a good cat story. I feel like, it's kind of similar to ones that you mentioned. I think that is possibly going to be similar to the Traveling Cat Chronicles, which is one that Liz has talked about on the podcast way, way, way back. I think that may have been one of the first ones that Liz talked about on the podcast that I did. I cried my way through it, but I did enjoy it. So I think that it's kind of going to be similar to that. So I Will Prescribe You a Cat by Seo Ishida, translated by E. Madison Shimoda. That one comes out September 3rd. September 3rd is going to be the translation. So those are my 2 honorable mentions for the fall that I'm looking forward to. I think that we did it. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening today. Thank you for hearing about all of our most anticipated picks. Hopefully, you have found something that can be added to your TBR list, either on today's episode or last week's episode. With Virginia and Kareen's picks. And you might hear more about these books as we start to read them. Maybe they'll pop up on our favorites of the year. We will see. I think that all of us are always looking for more 2024 books to add to our lists so that we can, when Virginia asks the inevitable question of which are your top books of the year, we actually have something to tell her. So let's hope that some of these come through for us. And you might hear about them some more. All right, Emma, any last words to say?
No, I think that was an excellent closing. So on behalf of me and Sadie, thank you for listening. Like she said, I hope you guys found something new to add to your own TBRs. And we will be back next week with some more recommended reads from Keep It Fictional.
Thank you for listening. If you like our show, please tell a fellow book lover about it. You can find a list of all the books we discussed in our show notes. Join us next week for another fun book chat. Until then, keep it fictional.